along the beach or through our southeast rainforest can be a quieting, contemplative experience. Hello, I'm Scott Foster. Welcome to Rain Country. When that walk also takes place during a low-cloud, misty day, when there are a few steps taken through an old-growth forest, and when your mind is set just right, it's not too hard to imagine what this land and its people must have been like thousands of years ago, long before the first explorer ships ever arrived.
Sandy Beach is an archaeological site, and we know that from the evidence on the tide flats and up on the forested areas that this was a prehistoric fish camp occupied probably by the Tlingit Indians perhaps thousands of years ago.
Right along this outside edge here.
Stay there, please.
This is the trap. Can everybody see this circular shape here? This would be the inside. If you all were salmon, you'd swim right through in here and be trapped as the tide went out. And at the time that it was being used, the rocks would have been tall enough, the pile of rocks would have been tall enough to prevent the salmon from jumping over or getting through the traps.
One of the basic questions that archaeologists are trying to answer in southeast Alaska is, when did the Tlingit Indians arrive here? I'd say 1,000 years old for the Tlingit arrival is probably the latest date. Others believe that they've been here a little bit longer, perhaps 3,000 years old, and that in fact the rise in the use of these fish traps may be the hallmark of the Tlingit culture, at least the first Tlingit people to arrive here.
Mark McCallum and the Forest Service have publicized the location of this archaeological site, hoping that with public understanding will come public protection. Despite that, the stone fish traps might not be obvious to the casual observer. To help show the shape during one of his tours, McCallum lined a group of Petersburg students along what's left of the rock funnel leading into a trap, and then used an old technique to save 1,000 words.
Spread out so everybody can see, okay? Basically, the traps were shaped like a heart, like that, okay? And then they had leads on them, or a funnel, like that, okay?
In addition to the stonefish traps at Sandy Beach, there are also traps made out of wood stakes. McCallum thinks these are more recent and perhaps replaced the stone traps because they were easier to build.
Now, here's the bottom of one of the stakes. Can you see how that's pointed? See? They would point the stick so that they could drive it down into the sand. They had big flat rocks called pile drivers that they would use to pile the rock down. They used stone tools to make this. You know, these stakes here have a potential to be about 3,000, 3,500 years old. That's a long time back. So these stakes would have stood up even higher than this, right along in here, and then there would have been twigs and branches woven in between that would have acted as a basket or a net to keep the salmon inside.
Fish traps are not the only indication of the early use of the Sandy Beach site. Near the tide line on a prominent rock are petroglyphs.
Well, this is so old. These are 3,000 to 5,000 years old. Wow. Somebody was out here, and we don't know what they mean anymore. The stories are so old that they've been lost to the people.
Petroglyphs will be an enigma for people for probably ever. They're not like hieroglyphics that can be deciphered or translated. In the case of the petroglyphs at Sandy Beach, they may be a way of telling other clans that these traps belong to a particular clan. They may also be a way of, again, paying respect to the salmon in order for them to come back year after year. They may have been used to mark a particular event in time. They may have simply been an indication that people were there. They may also be used as travel markers to orient other people to the area, and share with them information on where resources could be found. And some of them could simply be there for art purposes.
So much moss.
So there are a lot of explanations for petroglyphs and other types of rock art, but we'll probably never know the exact meaning.
After learning about the petroglyphs on the rock and the fish traps on the beach, it's back to school for the students and a later visit by their guide to put the trip into perspective.
Basically, this is the tide flat, or would represent the tide flat like we walked out on this morning. The tide rises and the fish swim over the traps, and then as the tide recedes, they follow through this funnel. They can't get through these areas, and they end up inside this trap, and most of them, if not all of them, can't get out. Can you see on this illustration here, they made these carvings, are almost like small totem poles. And these were ways of paying respect to the salmon people. And they were in a sense saying, you were good to us this year and we were respectful of you and we hope that you come back next year to feed our family.
McCallum also tells the students about other ways early residents caught fish, such as weirs built out of logs to prevent salmon from swimming upstream, or made out of rocks. Basket traps that captured salmon when they jumped inside, or when they were funneled inside a box. In addition to drawings, McCallum also shows slides of fish traps that have been found in Southeast.
This is an aerial photograph of a stone weir. The idea of the weir is to prevent the progress of the salmon up the stream, and the people would stand at the wall and spear or net the fish. This is an aerial photograph of probably the most common type of fish trap that we find in Southeast Alaska. This area here marks the boundary between the tide flat and saltwater. The upland areas, forested areas are back here. You can see these alignments of rock here, which are used to trap the fish. This is a ground eye view of a fish trap. You can see the outline of the rocks poking out of the water, coming around like this. And as the tide would come in, the fish would get back in this pool here and would be trapped as the tide went out.
McCallum says archaeologists have only looked at about 1% of the land in Southeast, and they've already found about 200 fish trap sites. He estimates there are probably several thousand other sites located throughout Southeast. If new ones are found, McCallum asks they be reported to Forest Service archaeologists. And anyone finding a trap should realize they are very susceptible to damage by humans.
As we saw here at Petersburg, some of the stakes have eroded out. Some people have come out here and used the stakes as digging sticks for clamming. And once these stakes are pulled out of the sand, they tend to decompose very quickly, because what happens when the stakes are buried and covered with the sand, they're sealed off from oxygen and they're kept wet and they preserve in place. But once they're pulled out, they're exposed to the air and they'll decompose within a matter of weeks. So they're very fragile resources, and we encourage people to come out and look at these sites and to touch them and feel them and take photographs, but to leave them behind so that we can learn about the past.